Hello, welcome back to my haunted library. It's Regina. I'm taking a little break from my fantasy genre kind of kick that I've been on and decided it was time to get back to my Gothic sensibility playlist that I started months ago that I really hadn't picked up on for a while because I really hadn't read a lot of Gothic literature. But last night, it was chilly. Lily and I got under the covers, and I finally finished Gothic by Richard Davenport-Hines. The full title of this is Gothic 400 Years of Excess, Horror, Evil, and Ruin. And this came out in 2000. And this is actually a reread for me. I had bought this book when it came out and somehow lost my copy. I don't know what happened. And I found this on 8 Books for a pretty good price. And I was noticing, Bald Book Geek did a video recently, and I love his channel. He did a video about bookbinding, which is something I'm very interested in. I actually took a class in it back when I was like in high school, which was really great. I made my own book. And he mentioned the difference between a real hardback and like a fake or bogus hardback where they don't have they don't have the fabric where the pages are actually sewn through. I noticed when I was reading this last night that it does have that. And so it's an authentic paperback. I mean, hardback. It's rather heavy, and I really like the cover. The dust jacket is very, I don't know if you can see, really kind of punk rock, and kind of reminiscent of this. He ends this book with like the young British artists movement, with like Damien Hirst and those kind of artists, and this is kind of reminiscent of that. The Chapman brothers were others, and then the actual cover is very classic with this gold lettering in a Gothic font against red. So it's very cool. It's a nice book. And this was published by North Point Press, Farrar, Straus, and Giroux, New York. And the price in 2000 was $35. So that's quite a lot of money. I'm sure I paid that much when I bought it back in that time. And I got it on 8 Books for maybe $20 plus shipping. So it's pretty good. This book is it's kind of rather long and laborious survey of Gothic, not only literature, but art, starting with the great Gothic architecture and then kind of moving forward through the Romantic poets and Byron and Shelley and Mary Shelley, and then through Victorian literature. So we get like spends a lot of time on Dracula, Frankenstein, Dracula, which is very interesting. Then he gets into the more, of course, this just came out in 2000. So he ends with kind of like a Goth movement, a current Goth movement in art, and the young British artists, Damien Hirst, the Chapman brothers. Lots about Poppy Z. Bright in here, which is interesting, and David Lynch and some other filmmakers. So it's very interesting. I really enjoyed all of that, and especially enjoyed the. I wrote down some notes about this. Okay, so he starts. He goes through the Gothic writers: Horace Walpole. Can never say that name, and Anne Radcliffe. To the Romantic poets. What's really interesting is he does this nice section on Frankenstein and Dracula, which were both essentially born over the same time period at the famous Villa Diodati on Lake Geneva. So Byron, Shelley, Mary Shelley, and Mary Shelley's half-sister, I think, Claire Claremont, came, along with Dr. Polidori, who is Byron's kind of lower in social status doctor / companion on these trips, and their relationship is very interesting. So they were all trapped in the house during some stormy weather, and for fun they decided to have like a ghost story contest, and out of that came Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. John Polidori started this based on something Byron had written apparently, and then he had later published a book called The Vampire, which I've never read, and that eventually evolved into Bram Stoker's Dracula. He also gets into like the early Dracula and Frankenstein films, and The Bride of Frankenstein, which if you know Frankenstein, The Bride of Frankenstein is like the really, really good, like it's a really artistic film. And of course, Young Frankenstein really stole a lot of things from The Bride of Frankenstein. I watched The Bride of Frankenstein a couple years ago, and it was like all restored on TCM, and it's an amazing, amazing film. He's got some great illustrations, some nice plates. That's Goya, Saturn devouring his children, and The Nightmare by Fuseli, which became like the image for Gothic. Here we have Vlad, how that was kind of parodied. Ken Russell's movie Gothic, I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it, is all about the weekend or summer getaway with Shelley and Byron, and it's really over the top, but it's really great. So this is excellent. I really, really enjoyed it. Oh, and he gets into like movies like Freaks, and here's Robert Smith from The Cure. Gets into like the later goth culture. So what I found also very interesting about this book is he's constantly referring to people as goths through the ages as a certain like personality type, which personally I related to. Now it doesn't mean that you have to walk around wearing black all the time and have black, fingernail polish and heavy eyeliner. You can, but just for fun, and this is not based on any scientific data, but I gleaned from this book some 10 questions to determine whether you are a goth or not. So let's just put this together and see. Like I said, this is just for fun. Always consult a physician before taking any of this seriously. So here's the quiz. Are you attracted to wild, stormy landscapes in art and reality? Yes. These are all yes or no. Number 2. Are you secretly thrilled when the electricity goes out, especially at night when you have to break out the candelabra? 3. Are you sad and or furious when an old Gothic style building is torn down and is replaced by a modern one? Number 4, do you despise Disney? Now, I would say yes to that, but I love early Disney, so not completely. 5, are you haunted by your past or your family's past? He gets into a lot of that in this book, like the ghosts of families, bloodlines, and things like that. 6, are you secretly disappointed when you have a good night's sleep without any nightmares? 7, do you prefer poetry, music, and wine or other libations to ease your inner woes over therapy and psych drugs? Like antidepressants. 8, are you attracted to antique shops and musty old bookstores as opposed to mall chain stores? 9, did you read Edgar Allan Poe on your own when you were in high school, like outside of the required reading list? Just like, I'm just going to read some Poe. And 10, do you consider wandering in an old graveyard a fun way to spend an afternoon? Okay, so if you answered yes to the majority of these questions, you are probably a goth, according to Richard Davenport-Hines' definition in this book. So it's not so much, it can be a fashion style, but it's more of like an inward like sensibility and taste, what you're drawn to. So I'm going away for a few days for a little self-imposed writer's retreat. I rented a cabin in the woods on a lake. Hopefully I won't end up as like in a horror movie because it doesn't have any Wi-Fi or things like that. So we'll see. But I may do a video on, I won't broadcast it live, but I will do a video about that experience next week sometime, end of next week. So looking at what books I wanted to bring with me, because I'm going to be writing, but I also like to do some reading. I pulled out a book that I received for Christmas that I'm ashamed to admit I still haven't cracked because I just love this subject of this book. And this is called Born to be Posthumous, The Eccentric Life and Mysterious Genius of Edward Gorey by Mark Derry. I've been an Edward Gorey fan since I was a child, when I first discovered his work in the library, where his book Amphigory was probably shelved in the children's book section, and it wasn't a children's book, and I loved it. I pulled out some stuff off my shelf. I don't know where my first Amphigory went. I hope I can find it. But this is Amphigory 2 and Amphigory also. And I also have in my prize collection some old, I'll do close-ups of these because my light is just not good for this. These are signed copies of 3 of his works. I wish I had bought more. This is the Willowdale Handcar, or The Return of the Black Doll, which is my favorite. Oh my God, it says for Lillian Gish is the dedication. This is my favorite Edward Gorey of all times. And he did sign it. And I will do close-ups of these because he signed all 3 of these. This is The Curious Sofa, a pornographic work by Edward Gorey, which was his anagram name. This is what I mean when this was in the original Amphigory book, and this was not made for children, which I discovered at about age 9 or 10. And this is a famous one. This is the Doubtful Guest by Edward Gorey, which is that weird little creature. So I'm definitely bringing Edward Gorey with me on my weekend getaway when I'm not working on my new book. I plan to read this, so I'll let you know in my next video when how that is. I'll do a review on it. So, but I was thinking about Edward Gorey, and where I got those signed copies was at the old Gotham Book Mart in New York City, which is sadly gone. And it's one of those sad cultural landmarks that was not able to keep up with the rent. It opened in 1920, I believe, and closed in 2007, I think, because the owner could no longer afford the rent, which had gone up to $50,000 a month, which is just so absurd. And I know that you can't stop progress, and just New York City just turned into that, and where so many of these wonderful old establishments, stores, record stores, bookstores, restaurants just could not keep up with the rent. And there's a blog, and I think he wrote a book too, called Vanishing New York, which sort of has been documenting, and it's very sad to read that blog. I lived in New York City for 10 years in Hell's Kitchen, and I saw a lot of these places, and I moved out in the 90s, like mid to late 90s, and that's when all that stuff was starting to shift. But I'm glad I got to live there and see it before that shift. And in Gothic, Davenport-Hines talks about Times Square as being like this one of the most Gothic places on earth, and that changed when it became Disney-fied. But when we lived there, it still was that dangerous, seedy place that you see in movies like Taxi Driver. And there was something, it was dangerous. I didn't walk around there alone at night, but there was something really real about it. And the Gotham Book Mart was that place. It was a real bookstore and literary salon. It brought in different writers who are kind of on the edge and brought them into the attention of the world via like the New York literary scene. So, people like Henry Miller and Anais Nin, T.S. Eliot, they all came through that bookstore, and so did Edward Gorey. And he had a career because of that bookstore. He was discovered. So I know when I read this, I will learn more about that. But the Gotham Book Mart was just a wonderful place. If you watch Rosemary's Baby, just a little trivia, when Rosemary goes into the bookstore and buys the books on witchcraft, that's Gotham Book Mart. And I think it's also used in a couple Woody Allen films. He was a fan of the Gotham Book Mart. It had this iconic sign where wise men go to fish or something. I'll do a little insert of that. And it was just great. It was in the basement. It was all kind of crammed. There was books everywhere. New books were on a big table. And then there was sections of like the old style like poetry books that were mimeographed and like stapled together. I had a bunch of those. Patti Smith did a reading there. I have a signed book from one of her books from her reading. There's all kinds of great stuff happening. So it's very sad that no longer exists. So maybe where places like the Gotham Book Mart no longer can sustain in this world that we're in, that the new literary salon has taken place here on Booktube. And I'm seeing evidence of that, and I'm very encouraged by it. So I'm happy to be part of it and be part of the conversation. And I encourage more people to join BookTube who maybe have like a different type of taste in books, just to bring it to the table, because you can find your like fringe or your niche here, and it's pretty cool. That is my hope anyway. So leave a comment below if you passed the Goth test. I'd love to know what your score was. Just give yourself 1 point per yes and 0 for no. And if you have a 6 or above, you're a Goth. So let me know if you love Edward Gorey, if you read this book or you want to, or also this Gothic by Richard Davenport-Hines. Let me know what you think. So hopefully I will survive my weekend away on the lake with Lily and no Wi-Fi, just me and my thoughts and my books. So maybe I'll come up with the next Dracula or Frankenstein. That would be cool. So thanks for stopping by my haunted library, and I'll see you soon. Bye.